Hi folks, welcome to the first tutorial for Curriculum 357 Game Design 1. Today we're going to dive into bitsy and take a look at some of the ways that you can use that as a tool. So I'm posting a couple of other tutorials to kind of get you into the more nitty-gritty. What we're going to cover today is just the basics of how the editor works, so what kind of windows there are, how you might move through it, and when you start getting into the design stuff, that will allow you to turn to the other tutorials when you have specific questions. Okay, so let's take a look at bitsy. So if you go to the link provided on the course website, you'll get something that looks like this. So this is the interface. And there's a bunch of things here that might be a little overwhelming at first. So let's just take a look at how you might work through this. So the first thing you can do is we're just going to close all of these windows. So you have this X that minimizes each one. And we'll go back through them one at a time so that it's a little less overwhelming. So we have this clean workspace. First thing we're going to do is come in here and retitle our game. So this is going to be my tutorial game. The next thing you can do is click on the Tools button. So that will pull up a list of all the windows that we just closed so that we can take a look through them and decide what we want to pull up for our workspace. So before we get into those, there's two things that, let's take a look at the room panel and then I'll tell you two things that you want to make sure you're taking into account when you do build your game. So the first panel here is the room panel. When we pull that up, there's a couple things to take note of. It's relatively a simple panel. We can hit play, and that will give us a demo of how our game currently looks. And there's a default set of things here. And we can hit stop to stop that. Now the first thing to keep in mind is any changes that you make while the game is playing aren't going to be saved. So you want to make sure that you stop your game before you edit anything else in the room or in any of the other windows. The second thing to keep note of is that if you delete your baseline room, it might cause problems. So always keep room 0, what we'll call this, in your game. So we can take a look at some of these buttons. You'll see these 5 buttons on a lot of the different windows. And they all do more or less the same thing on each of those windows. So the first is this plus button. So we have one room. We can add another room, and that gives us this blank space with nothing in it. And then these arrows will cycle between the rooms that we've created. We can also duplicate a room. That gives us all the tiles that we have here, but without our character or our sprite. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And we can delete a room. Okay. Down below here, we have a couple of other things, and we'll talk about what these go to in just a second. But the one that's relatively simple is this visibility. And if we go back to here, we can see that if we turn off the grid, we can see what it's going to look like while we're playing. We turn off wall. We don't have right now any walls. But walls are things that block the character, and we can turn those on and off to see them. And we can turn off endings and exits to see where those are. And again, we don't have any of those yet. Okay. So one of the things that you can do here in the room is that we can pull up the colors palette window. And you can see down here that we're currently selecting palette 0. We can also, in here, create a new palette. It's going to be palette 1. Let's say we're just going to keep these colors. Now we can go down into our room palette and change that. So one of the things about bitsy is that every room can only have 3 colors, but you can have multiple palettes that different rooms will choose between. So you can have more than 3 colors in your whole game. Now, the colors panel is really quite simple. Again, we have this name, we have cycling and creating, and then the 3 options are you have a background color, a tile color, and a sprite color. And if you click on any of those, you can pick colors from this color picker and play around with them. So it will change on the fly. I'm going to use the default colors for the rest of this tutorial, but you should play around with those for your game. All right, so that's the color panel. We're going to close that. The next panel that we're going to take a look at is the paint panel. So again, we'll go up here, pull this up. Now this one is actually a little bit more complicated. There's a few things in here to take note of. But before we get into the paint panel itself, let's take a look at how it affects our room. So here, we selected the avatar. We can now paint that avatar in our room. One of the things you can notice is there can only be one avatar. That's the thing that the player is going to control. If we switch to our tile, we see this is the tile that's around the outside edge here, and we can paint that tile. Now there can be more than one. If I click again, it will get rid of that tile. One of the options on the tile window here is that I can turn tiles into walls. And then we already saw down here there's a visibility option for walls that will show us where we can and can't walk within our room. Okay. So avatars and tiles so far. We also have sprites. Now, one of the things to note with sprites is that they also can only be one of each sprite in a room. We'll come back to some of these options here in a second, but I want to show you the last item here, which is items. And these, there can be more than one item in a room. Now, one of the things to take note of, the avatar is something the player controls. The tiles are in the background. They can be walls, but otherwise the player will just walk over them. When the player walks into a sprite, it will pop up with some dialogue. And you can do a lot of editing with the dialogue, but the sprite will stay in its own place without you being able to walk over it or change it. Items, on the other hand, will also pop up with dialogue, but they'll disappear when you walk over them. So let's take a quick look at that. So while I'm playing here, I can walk up to the cat. It will say, I'm a cat. I can walk over a cup of tea, and now the tea is gone. So that's the difference between sprites and items. All right, let's stop our game. In the paint window, there's a couple of other things to take note of. So one of them is that we can add animations. So let's say right now we have and we only ever get 2 frames for animations. It's an important thing. Bitsy has all these constraints that are here to work with. We can paint our avatar by selecting the second frame and adding a foot. Now we have this animation of our avatar tapping its foot. When we paint, we only have an on and an off state. So it can either be a white pixel or not, or whatever color we've chosen in the palette window. And so if we click off, it will turn either the background color or the white color into sort of the thing that we're playing with. We can turn off animations entirely, and now we can just edit our sprite. Say we want them to look more like a chair. Okay. So again, just clicking, you're turning the pixels on and off for the sprite, or for any of these. On the tile, we have this wall option that we already took a look at, and again, we can add some animation if we wanted to. On the sprite, we have this dialogue option that we'll look at in a little bit. And on the item, we have this dialogue option and an inventory, and we'll get back to the inventory in a bit as well. The last thing to take a look at in the paint window is these things that we've already looked at here, we now have this lookup, this fine drawing subframe. So one of the things that you'll quickly get sort of used to in bitsy is that especially with tiles, but for all of these, we might have dozens of them in a large game. And it can be a little bit time consuming to switch through them with the arrow keys. And so we have this fine drawing panel that allows you to search through them. So if I wanted to find cat, there's no cats in tiles, but it finds cats in the sprite. Now, let's say I had a ton of these. It would be really difficult to find them if I don't do the proper, or don't come up with a naming scheme so that I can search for them. So when you're creating new tiles, it's important to think about what you want to name them so that you can then go and use this search function to find only the block tile, say. So you can quickly paint with that. All right, so that is more or less the paint tab. One thing just to keep in mind, you can always drag these windows so that they are rearranged in the way that you want to use them. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is another thing that's useful for designing your rooms. Now we've created 2 rooms, right? This one is blank. We're just going to quickly paint some more tiles here so that we have a sense of how this room is different from the previous room. Just going to make it something like that. And close that. And the next thing that we want to add is this exits and endings. Okay, so right now we're this chair walking around. We can't get to our other room yet. So we have these 2 rooms, but we can't get to the second one. We can make it accessible by going to the Exits and Endings tab and adding an exit. So there's a couple things to keep track of here. We can see where the exit is in our current room, and it's represented here by this block. We can drag it around. We could also click the Move button to place it by clicking, or click this Edit button to choose a room that we want the exit in and choose the specific tiles it should be on. We're not going to use that here. We're just going to put the exit right there. The second thing to know is that this exit has a place where it will end up. So in our second room, we can see that the place where you're going to go when you step on this tile is right down in this corner. Now, we want this to actually be inside this little space, or I want it to be there. So now we can play this and see that our character is going to pop to the other room when we go here. And when we go back over it, it's going to pop to this room. Now that's because in our exits and endings, we have this little change direction tab. And when I created a new exit, I chose this option. You can see here, we have an exit, a one-way exit, and an ending. But we don't have to, we can make these changes on the fly. So I can change the direction so that this is now a one-way exit. When I step on this space, it will go to this other room, but I can't go back now. I can also go the other direction if I wanted to. So that is how you're going to connect your rooms together. The next thing to know is that you also have an ending option. And this is for the final part of the game. When you want everything to come to an end, you can place that, and it has a dialogue option. Just like the exits also can have a dialogue option if you go into this option panel. So in the option, you get a couple things. You get a transition effect, so you can have a funky thing. And you can have some narration. You walk through the doorway, for instance. Let's see how that looks. So I put this option only on the second one. And you can see that was the wave effect and the walk through the doorway. Okay, so the one other thing that's in here that we might want to play around with, well, there's a couple other things, but you can always pop out the dialogue narration into its own window, and we'll get back to the dialogue in a little bit. But there's also this add lock option, and we'll get to that in a little bit as well. But right now, we just have a way of connecting two rooms and a way of bringing your story to an end. So that's the core elements of the exits and endings window. All right. So now that by and large is most of what you need to work in bitsy. The last thing is the dialogue window. And this is where you're going to do a lot of your work to kind of tell a story when the player steps on things, when they go through exits and entrances, and when they bump into sprites. Okay, so what is the dialogue window? It's deceptively simple. So the first thing, you have a preview option. So we can always just take a quick look at how, I'm going to stop this, how a dialogue looks in preview. That's going to be useful when you start building more complex versions of dialogue. Second thing to note is this title dialogue. So this is a special case. This is, you can't change the name of this one, and this is going to pop up with the dialogue when you start the game. So if you want to edit that, that's how. Now, all the rest of the dialogues have these names, and you can edit them just like any other thing in bitsy. I can come in here and I can type, I'm a dog, let's say. You can turn on text effects if they're not on already. So let's say I wanted this to be a different color. So this will choose one of the colors from my color palette for the room. Or if I want it to be wavy, I can make that wavy. You can see it's starting to add a little bit of code. We're going to come back to that in a minute, but for now, we'll simplify that. You can also insert any of the sprites or tiles that you've already made. So here, when we preview that, you can see that's the little cat icon that we made earlier, or that came with bitsy rather. So that's how you edit a basic dialogue option. Now we're going to start to look at how you construct a larger dialogue tree. Okay, so we have this dialogue unit right now. It's in cat dialogue, but it's its own little box here, right? We're going to hide the text effects just so it's a little bit simplified. You can see here this box called I'm a dog. We can add another dialogue. So I clicked add dialogue, dialogue, and we'll leave it as these ... When you add another dialogue, it doesn't, it's just going to append it to the previous one. So you can see when we click here, what looks like it's two different things over in the dialogue options gets compacted down to I'm a dog ... all on one line. So if you want to create more breaks, what you can do is add a page break. So let's say we add a page break. Now we're going to move this one by clicking the down arrow after the page break. I'm a dog ... So you can see now there's this break between the two. That's still pretty simple. We're still editing a linear sequence. Um, and we can go in here and see how that works. Walk up to the cat. Oh, and I made these changes before I had stopped my playthrough. So it actually didn't save any of this, and this is the thing that you're going to have to get used to. If I say go back and forward, it's just collapsed this into one. So I'm going to go back in here, add a page break, and then add my dialogue, ... Now if I play this, we'll see when I walk up to the cat, I'm a dog, ... Now if I press down into the cat again, it's going to repeat that same dialogue. And that goes on ad infinitum. So what if we want to change things? What if we want every time the player steps into the cat to have a different dialogue option? Well, we can do that. I'm going to get rid of this. And this time, we're going to add a list. So there's 4 kinds of lists here. They're all relatively simple. The first and simplest is the sequence list. And so each time I go through the dialogue tree with the cat, it's going to give me one of these different sequence elements. So first we'll say ... The second time we're going to say ... No, that's not. Oh, and I should stop this to make sure that it's saving. So we're going to add the sequence list, ... And then the second one, ... No, I'm actually a cat. So we'll go in here and play this so you can take a look. So the first time through it says, I'm a dog, ... Now I can walk around. Second time through, I'm a dog, ... No, I'm actually a cat. Okay, stop that. So that's a sequence list. After you go through the sequence and get to the end of it, it's just going to keep repeating the last line in that sequence. But you can do, if you don't want that sort of repetitious behavior, you can go to a cycle. So this time it will use the ... and then this one, and then it will go back for the third time to this ... again. And then to the cat, and then to the ... and so on. It will just keep repeating. The third option here is you can shuffle. So if you want to choose from a list of things in a random order, you can do that too. So you can say, I'm a dog, ... or ... No, I'm actually a cat, and it will choose between those each time in whatever order. So we're still kind of in the linear mode here, but these give us some tools to add a little bit of difference each time that we talk to a character in the game. Beyond that sort of straightforward difference, though, we also have a fourth option in our lists called a branching list. Now we'll have to look at a couple other parts of bitsy to see how this works. And the first one is that we have to go into the inventory bar here. So when we create an item, like this teacup, it creates a new variable in the items side of this. And every time we step on a teacup, bitsy is going to automatically add 1 to our items list here. And so with our branching dialog, if we click on it, we can choose an item, and we can choose an option, and a number. So here, it's going to say, if we've collected 2 cups of tea, then the cat is going to say, I really like tea. Otherwise, it's just going to say ... We're going to get rid of this other one. We're even going to get rid of this first thing. And we'll go in here and play this. So we walk up to the cat, it just says ... We can do it again. Now if I collect 1 cup of tea, 2 cups of tea, and you can see over here in the inventory menu, it's only at 2, but I need it to be greater than 2. So 3 cups of tea, 4, just for good measure. And now the cat says, I really like tea. So this is a way that you can use a basic branching structure by what the player has picked up. It's still fairly constrained, and that's one of the things you're going to play around with across bitsy, but it gives you a little bit more freedom to sort of make the game based on how the player has played. Stop that. Just to wrap up that part of things, you can go into your paint panel here. And one of the things we saw before is this dialogue option. For each of the sprites, if you want to change what the dialogue is, you can set it to one of the dialogues that you've created in the dialogue window. Similarly, with the endings and exits on the room menu, or in this panel, you can change the exit dialogue. You can either write it directly if you don't want to create a new dialogue thing for it, or you can choose one of the dialogue options. So I could put the cat dialogue on the exit window as well. All right, we're going to go back into dialogue for a second. So we're starting to get some tools to build a little bit more complex dialogue. There's a couple of other actions here that you can take. So if you want something to happen at the end of talking to somebody in the game, you can do that as well. So you can have it move to a new exit. So you can choose the room, you can choose the location, or you can click to pick a destination. It's going to get rid of that. You can end the game, or you can lock and unlock something. So one of the things on our exits and endings menu that we just skipped over because we didn't know how it worked yet is that the exits can be locked. So we can add a lock here. And that will go to this. And it basically checks our inventory for an option and uses a branching path to decide which sort of path this will take. So what you would want to do here then is add, at the end of this path, an exit action to take the player through the door and to a new place. You can also, yeah, right. Okay. So I'm going to go back to our cat dialog. So we can change a property. We also saw that we can add exits and endings. So we've gone through here. We can also do some changes to our items. So if we wanted to talk to somebody and say our cat gives us a cup of tea, we can add to the item count. Or we can change a variable. So variables are just like a little bit more complex version of items here. Items, bitsy keeps track of everything for us, whereas variables, we can create them and set them to a range of different things. And they won't automatically increment. We have to do all the work with them. So that's most of what the sort of simple functionality of dialogues looks like. Now, all of that doesn't give you a lot to work with, but it's the basic building blocks that you can then take a look at by clicking the Show Code button down at the bottom here. Now, bitsy has a scripting language for dealing with dialogue, and it's relatively simple. These curly brackets give you a block, and There's syntax for the sort of different kinds of lists and for conditionals. So here you have the conditional for if your item 0, which is the key, is greater than 2, then write this. Otherwise, do a ... Now there's a lot more you can do with this kind of dialog system, including using your custom variables here to make more complex if statements. But that goes a little bit beyond this tutorial. So I'm going to link you to a couple of other tutorials that will flesh that out if you want to make more complex dialog. You don't have to for this assignment. But that's where you would go to look at it. And if you want to see how the dialog that you're already building kind of works in bitsy, you can always like create a, say a test dialog tree, create a cycle list and so on, and then use show code to reveal how it's working. So this you'll ultimately probably want to work with it to give you a little bit more control over how your dialog looks and how it's going to flow. The last thing to take a look at, now that we've created our game, so we've gone through our room, our exits and endings, our paint, our fine drawings, colors, dialogue, inventory. Now we have these 4 here that give us some tools to do stuff with our game after we've finished it. So the first one is downloading it. So you can download your game and you can import it. So this is basically saving and loading, but you can also directly send the game from this downloaded file. So that's what you're going to submit to me for this assignment. The second thing you can do is you can record a GIF. So this is useful if you want to show a small section as a preview of your game, especially if you're going to upload it to a website like itch.io or itch.io, where you can share games with a broader community really easily. And we'll, if you want to do that, that's an option for this assignment as well. You can get your game data. So this bitsy saves games as text files, and you can take a look at how the game is being saved here. So each of your sprites are made up of 0s and 1s that are going to tell the game when to draw something and when not to. So this is a way that you can, say, copy stuff from a previous game if you want to import it into a new game. And the last thing is you have a couple settings here. So you can change the language of your game, you can change the background color that it's going to be displayed on, you can change the size at which it's displayed, and you can change the font. So you can upload your own font if you want. There's some limits on that, but you can do a search for bitsy fonts if you want. So that is more or less your introduction to bitsy as a platform, as a thing that you can use to make games in. You will want to look at some of the other tutorials to see how you can flesh that out, but that should get you a good ways into your project.